Right now, the most valuable companies on Earth are racing to sell you their stock. It's more money, bigger names, and higher valuations than ever before. Subscribe to Casual Tech if you want to know why this is actually a massive trap. But to others, this isn't a celebration, it's a trap, and I'm on that side. By the end of this video, you will be too. Because in the stock market, an open door is never a favor. Generosity doesn't exist here. Make sure you're following Casual Tech for the truth they don't want you to hear. Subscribe and follow our channel now! Insiders are in a hurry to sell. Why? If the future is so bright, why are Sam Altman and Elon Musk counting on you not to ask this question? It's a pattern called the dine and dash, and it's happened before every major bubble burst. Casual Tech is breaking down the cycle right now. Don't forget to subscribe. Big Tech is spending $725 billion this year on AI infrastructure. That is the largest build-out in human history. Subscribe to Casual Tech to understand the scale of this insanity. We're talking $23,000 every second. Join our community now. It's a giant game of hot potato. The insiders are passing the stock to you before the music stops. Don't be the one left holding the bag. Hit that subscribe button on Casual Tech right now. Stay smart, stay ahead. See you in the next one. Subscribe and follow for more.